I'm recording the session like I did last week, just so you're aware. And then these are the same norms we went through last week. So since it's just you and I, feel free to jump in at any time and ask questions. You don't have to mute your microphone. You can use the chat for questions if you'd like, because I do have that pulled up to the side. So I think I said this last time too, if I look over here, your face is off to the side. So that's why I might not be looking directly at the screen. So as a reminder, and we say this at the beginning of our PDs, but everything we do does tie back to our MTSS framework. And when thinking about TPACK and the SAMR model, they really do support the evidence-based instructional priorities and really like the lesson planning, like the planning, the implementation, and even the reflective practice. So I just want to make sure I point that out, because when I talk about it today, I'm going to refer to TPACK and SAMR a lot during that planning and reflective phase. And that's going to be why. So our learning intentions today are I'm learning how the TPACK framework and the SAMR model can support me when planning, executing, and evaluating technology in a lesson. And I'll know I'm successful when I can define and describe the TPACK framework and SAMR model, and then plan lessons and reflect on the technology use in those lessons using TPACK and SAMR. And that's what we'll really talk more about throughout this lesson. And once again, if you have questions or want clarification at any time, feel free to interrupt me and I'm happy to do that. So kind of an overview of the agenda. I talk about the best practices of digital teaching and learning, and then I'll share some questions to consider, and then we'll review the TPACK and SAMR, like what are they? And then I'll talk about them in terms of application during the lesson planning process, implementation, and evaluation. So I wanted to start with the best practices for digital teaching and learning. This was something that we did share during our tech summit that happened back in August, and it is currently in the CSD curriculum manuals. And I wanted to point out, and I heard this phrase in a video when I was refreshing my memory of like what I wanted to talk about today. And someone I listened to said, teaching with technology adds a new layer of knowledge and expertise. And it's the new layer part that I wanted to point out, because when my team was looking at and trying to identify for teaching and learning, we were trying to be very careful not to identify best practices that would be one more thing in addition to what teachers are already doing. We're trying to help people see that it's that additional layer, because it does require some more knowledge and expertise, but it can definitely be applied to the practices and strategies that are already in place in your classroom. And even thinking about the instructional priorities that our district really reinforces, like opportunities to respond. You'll see even specifically in our best practices, we have teacher clarity, explicit instruction, which are both instructional priorities as well. And then we identify practice, but that can be, the systematic vocabulary. It can be part of instructional hierarchy. So really, this is just a layer and maybe a different lens to be able to think about how you can be doing those different instructional approaches, while also thinking about how to bring in tech that. So I wanted to point that out, because as we start talking more about TPACK and SAMR, the TPACK and SAMR is trying to help you get that lens. So as you're really thinking about using technology, and I'm an ed tech, I love technology, I will be an advocate for it, but I'm also comfortable, I joke, I'm comfortable with my technology-ness that I can say, you know what, technology should not be used in this particular situation. And that's where these lenses can really help you identify, do I need technology really? And it's okay to say no if you don't. But if you're going to use it, you want to be very cognizant of how you're using it and if it really will support, what you're trying to do and that student growth and achievement. Once again, this is in the CSD curriculum maps if you want access to that again. So, and these aren't the only questions to consider, but when I was thinking about what would I do if you're going to start using the TPACK framework and SAMR when you're trying to plan lessons, or even think about different activities you could be doing with technology in your classroom, what should you consider? And I'll revisit these as we continue to talk, but like, what are the learning intentions and success criteria? It should always come back to, what are students supposed to learn and how are they going to show that they've learned it, that teacher clarity piece. Do I have sufficient knowledge of my teaching subject? And think about my own teaching experience, because I started teaching 5th grade, and there were moments where there were topics I was supposed to teach, and I really did have to reflect, do I know enough about the topic itself to truly be able to teach it? And that does come into play when we talk more about the TPACK framework. What teaching approaches can I use in a classroom setting to guide student thinking and learning in my teaching subject? And I put instructional priorities in parentheses because it really is those instructional practices. So what do we already do? And this might even address when, I know, Christine, you work with teachers. So thinking even about this question, before you can even start using technology with a teacher, or if you're like, I want to use Google Slides, you may have to even approach, okay, let's talk about the teaching strategies first before we bring in technology. The next question is, what tasks will promote students' complex thinking of my teaching subject? How will I evaluate students' performance in my teaching subject? So really thinking about how you're going to check for understanding. What technologies can be used to enhance what I teach, how I teach, and what students learn. And then I added a little caveat to this, to what technologies are specific to my subject, because in our district, I know we do have some technologies out there that have either been purchased for certain departments or different subjects. I know in our elementaries, we have Savvis, we have Reading Street, but really being aware of what technologies might already be out there specific to what you're teaching that you can take advantage of. And then how can I support student growth, understanding, and achievement? And then how will I provide that appropriate feedback? Because thinking about evaluation system in our district, our CTES, feedback cycles is a huge part of that. When you're doing IPOPT, your principal is actually looking at those feedback cycles, looking for the entire loop. And so you want to be aware of that as well. So like I said, just questions to consider. Not the only questions, and they won't be the only questions I bring up as we move forward, but I think they're good ones to start off with, especially when you're thinking of using technology in your classroom. So let's just refresh our memory of what TPACK and SAMR are, in case it is a brand new concept. So TPACK is a technology integration framework that identifies 3 types of knowledge instructors need to combine for successful educational technology integration. So you have the technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge. The technological, for some reason, gets me every day. It's a big word. But the 3 primary forms of knowledge are fairly separate. So you'll see in this graphic, they actually do overlap. I always joke, and I think even in Tech Summit, I had a picture of Kermit the Frog here. It's okay to be in the green section, because that's where content and pedagogy actually overlap. And that's where, if you're just focusing on the content and pedagogical knowledge, that's enough, because the technology knowledge, if you don't need to use technology, if it really doesn't benefit or bring something to that lesson, it's okay not to use technology. But ideally with the TPACK framework, when you're bringing all 3 elements in, you want to be in that middle where you have the technological, pedagogical, and the content all working together. And this is where, when you're thinking about and maybe evaluating a lesson that you're doing, if you're finding you're in just technological versus pedagogy, but you're lacking in the content area, so you're in that little pink area, the darker pink, you may want to reevaluate the technology use in that situation. Same with the other, if you're looking at just technological versus content, maybe the best practices for the instructional strategies are missing, you need to reevaluate some things. I was going to say something and I totally forgot what it was about this. Let me see if I remember. Oh, what I was going to say, and I guess I hesitate to make this such of a bold statement, because someone could probably always say, well, what about this situation? But you should be really cautious about designing a lesson around technology, around a technology tool. And I think that's another basis for using this framework, because I've seen teachers say, I want to do I actually had this situation with a coach, actually. She contacted me and said, I have a 1st grade teacher who wants to do a Google Slides activity with their students. And I really had to have a conversation, and it was reflecting on these elements of the TPACK framework, where I had to ask, first of all, okay, I know you want to use Google Slides, that's awesome, but what's the learning intention success criteria for this activity? And then you can't just expect 1st graders to be able to, well, I think they can do Google Slides. There's certain best practices that have to be in play before I bring in them using Google Slides. And so I actually really was reflecting on my knowledge of the TPACK framework to frame that conversation to really create a lesson and a plan moving forward for first graders using Google Slides. Because I don't think you should center your lesson around a tool. It can be used, but that's where using the TPACK framework can support. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that?
No, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because like you said, in my situation where I am mentoring UVU interns, it's their first year of teaching, and it's good to be reflective and really know where you are at within this framework, and making sure that my new teachers have that content knowledge and the pedagogical knowledge down before I throw something like Google Slides or an earpod at them. So it's something for them to be reflective about, but myself as well, being their mentor, like making sure is this something that's going to enhance their lessons and help them grow? Is it the right time, or should I maybe hold off a little bit before encouraging them to incorporate that piece?
Yeah, and I was thinking about coaches and even like teachers when they're in their IPLCs, when you're talking about, this can be a great thing to reflect on and use as talking pieces. There's a slide coming up that will even provide some more questions that can help as well in these dialogues. So like I said, that's why when I think about TPACK and SAMR, it's really in that planning and reflective piece that I see it being utilized. Implementation, and I'll talk about it. You're just doing, you're teaching, and then you're going to be reflecting after, like, okay, how did that go? And you can make some adjustments for the future. But
yeah, because I think it's great that the district is supporting the implementation of technology in classrooms so much. I mean, like, my school is pretty near one-to-one, with student to technology, and we love that. But also, even though we are pushing technology so much, it's like, make sure there's a purpose for it. And I had not thought about that, like what you're saying, starting not. What did you say? Not building a lesson around a piece of technology, because I've done that before too. But you made a good point about that. So
and it's easy to do because we hear about these cool tools. Like, I mean, and you hear about so many things so quickly, and you want to quickly implement them, but you always want to remember content and then tools. So then with SAMR, SAMR. It classifies digital learning experiences into 4 levels. And I want to make clear that it's not a continuum of good versus bad. So it's not like you start S is good or bad and the R is good. It's a way for you to reflect on how the technology is being used. So with substitution, and I actually like this coffee example, and I know people who don't drink coffee.
It's a great visual. I love this so much.
But it helps me, and so I'm going to talk through that because the same words are on this slide as it is on the actual representation. The one that's the little steps is the one that I've seen used a lot. But when I learned about the Starbucks example, it just kind of clicked for me, because you have the substitution, which is S, where technology acts as a direct tool substitute with no functional change. So just like coffee, like it's just a direct substitute for maybe hot chocolate or whatever. There's no real change. I think about with the substitution, even for teachers, sometimes when you're trying to get into using technology in the classroom, sometimes being at the substitution level is how you get your feet wet and you start getting used to certain things. Or maybe even for students, using the substitution is a way for them to get started as well. So it's not a bad thing to be at the substitution level, but it's good to be aware that this is how you're using the technology for. Then the augmentation, the A, is where technology acts as a direct tool substitute with functional improvement. So you have your coffee, some and now still coffee with milk, but it's a latte. But you're still using that tool as a direct substitute with some improvements. And then with the M, the modification, technology allows for a significant task redesign. And then when you move into R, is the technology allows for the creation of new tasks, so redefinition possible without technology. Like I said, maybe I like it because I love pumpkin spice lattes, but it's just interesting to know that that's a completely different drink from the coffee that you started with in the beginning. So I have a more classroom example. It's very basic, but it's a way to think about if you're using technology or you're wanting to maybe think about what you're doing. So I think about if I gave students a topic of you're researching a topic online and you're going to write an essay. So with substitution, they're researching online like they always do. They're composing their essay using a word processing program like Microsoft Word, Apple Pages. But then if they're doing like course reviews with each other, they're still like printing them out and handing them to someone else. Like the pure substitution is rather than writing it on paper, you're using a word processing tool. But with augmentation, students can research a topic online, compose their essay using Google Docs, allows students to be able to read each other's and also leave comments and editing options right on the document alone, which you wouldn't have been able to do if I just used Microsoft Word or a different program that didn't have that capability. And I do know Microsoft Word kind of has that, but there's not that real-time interaction that can happen like you can with Google Docs. With modification,
sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So with augmentation, for example, would that be like instead of CSD docs, like if I had my kids submit their essay to me on Canvas and I like left, because you know I can when I'm reading it, I can leave comments and stuff like that, would that be augmentation?
That's hard because with these, it's actually funny with this activity. We usually have an activity where you can we give people situations and you argue which one it is, and it can always be argued for or against. I'd almost lean towards that's direct substitution because you're still leaving comments. It's just not in real time. Meaning they're submitting it and then I'm leaving my comments and maybe they see it the next day. What would make it augmentation and why CSD Docs I feel like is more augmentation is than Canvas would be, is that we can all be on the same document in different locations. We don't have to be sitting right next to each other, and we can actually be making the comments in real time and the edit options in real time.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that seem like a little bit of a difference where?
Yeah, the real time feedback makes more sense. I'm just trying to think, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but could you give me another example of augmentation?
Yes. So I think about, I have to go back to this, with functional improvement. So I even think about, oh gosh.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You know what? Because I actually have a list somewhere else. Can I get that list and I'll send it to you? And then I'll actually,
Absolutely.
It'll give you some more detailed, sorry, I'm not.
No, that's totally fine.
No, I have better examples, and I don't want to give you a crappy one right now. I'd rather get a better one. So I'll get them and I'll send them to you.
Okay. We can move on to modification.
Okay. Because with modification, this is where they can then publish it online. And it's where people can actually, and I think about more publishing online for an authentic audience, like a blog. So it's not just you're publishing it for the school or the class where it's in Canvas or it's posted on the bulletin board. It's actually online for others to see. And then with redefinition, it's where you can actually connect with experts around the world and actually contribute to something like a podcast where it's not even just a written word anymore. It's like you're sharing your findings through a podcast and through actual verbal. But I will find more. I actually have more examples, and we actually shared them, I believe, in the DTL Summit or the Tech Summit. I even had more detailed examples for different grade levels and subjects. So I'll find those and send them to you because knowing how you work with those USU students, that will be helpful. Or UVU, or your UVU, not USU.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. So no, that's good. Keep me on my toes. That's really good. So with TPACK and SAMR, like I said, I feel like a good starting point and really a good place to be thinking about them is when you're planning. I have a copy of our CSD lesson planning template that should be available in the curriculum maps. If for some reason you can't find it, let me know and I can send you an actual link to it. But you'll see in the lesson planning template, there's different sections. The first two sections are the planning and the teaching part. And with the planning, it's where you really identify the topic, the content, the standard you're going to be teaching from, whatever your lesson is, what standard. And then that's where I think about the teacher clarity piece, where you really unpack that standard to find out what are the skills and concepts kids are supposed to know, and then using those to develop your learning intentions and success criteria. And then those two things, your learning intention success criteria, can really help when you're thinking about that TPACK. Do I know what I need to know about the content? What teaching practices can I use to really support the student learning? And then are there technologies that can bring value to this? And I have another slide that has better questions, but and I understand, I totally get it. And this is the pushback I'll get from teachers all the time. And I'm one of those people that push back on it. Realistically, we don't have time to do a lesson, like a detailed lesson for everything we teach. But with that said, I do think it's good practice to at least go through the lesson planning process with something like complete from start to finish, at least once or twice, just because then you get in the habit of knowing what things to pay attention to and what questions to ask, what things to think for. Like, I know for me, because I teach teachers, I do professional development, and I use a lesson plan, not this specific lesson planning guide. There's one that we use for professional development, but I do these things, like I have my learning intention success criteria, and I really start detailing like what I'm going to be, like what I'm going to do versus what I want my participants to do, what tools I need, because that can help me think about when I'm thinking about bringing in technology, if it really is going to support the lesson that I'm teaching, and will it support and really help the students achieve what I'm hoping that they're going to get to with the success criteria. So I get it that going through a lesson plan, we don't have time realistically to do this all the time, but this is where I can help you with that reflection before teaching and even after, when bringing in that technology. So with the TPACK framework, under that, I start with the content knowledge. It's like, what are you teaching and what is your knowledge of the subject? And if I recognize that I'm teaching something on Flipgrid, and there's a few things I'm not sure of, I'm going to make sure that I go back and they really make sure I'm knowledgeable enough to make sure I can teach that to my participants. And then with those questions I brought up earlier, like, do I have sufficient knowledge? What are those learning intentions and success criteria? And then with the pedagogical knowledge, like, how do your students learn best, and what instructional strategies do you need to meet the needs and the requirements of the lesson plan? And I love that, to think about, like, how do your students learn best, because students are so different. And if you've taught enough, like year after year, and new teachers don't quite know this, but you can have a great lesson that's awesome. Everything in that lesson went smoothly. You do the exact same lesson a different period or even the next year, and the students are going to be different, and there'll be a different experience with that lesson. So it's really thinking about the students you'll be teaching and those instructional strategies that will be needed to really support. And so with that question I asked earlier, or told you to consider earlier, what teaching approaches can I use in a classroom setting to guide the student thinking and learning in my teaching subject? And then the technological knowledge, what digital tools are available, which do you know well enough to use, and which would be the most appropriate for the lesson at hand. And I like that it says, which do you know well enough to use? Because I recognize too that you're just going to get better when you do it. So you should never shy away from using technology in your classroom if you're not an expert, because no one will ever be an expert with technology, and there will always be technological issues no matter who you are. But I would recommend making sure that if you're going to use something like Nearpod or Google Slides, that you've had experience with, or at least practiced enough so that you feel confident to do it with your students. And it's totally okay to ask students for help and questions. I've done that, but you still want to make sure that you're prepared and you kind of know what to expect. And I talk about it in the implementation part, but mistakes are going to happen. Technology issues are going to happen. And I'll recommend a few things to maybe think through with that. So never shy away from it, but I would make sure you've at least had exposure and you've tried some things out, like you've actually practiced what you're about to have the kids do, so you can be prepared for that.
I like that. In addition to like practicing it and making sure you're familiar with it, something that I've always done, I feel like at our school, we've always been really lucky to have great ed tech coaches. And I know there's so many great ed tech coaches throughout the district, but like, I've always just felt comfortable enough with my ed tech coach at my school to be like, hey, I'm trying out, this new program for the first time. Like, can you come in and like either co-teach with me or, just be there and help me out, like if the technology, has a glitch or something. And so I feel like most ed tech coaches at, the schools would be willing to do that. So that's always been
Yeah.
helpful, something I've always really appreciated.
No, and I used to do that. So I used to be an ed tech coach, and that's something I love to be able to do. And like I'd have teachers where I would do it first, and then they would with another class, and they would do it. And then I know with our coaching model, it's being updated, so we're no longer having just ed tech versus achievement coaches. It's all going to be one coach. And so this is where your coaches will be. I hope I'm not putting anyone on the spot, but I know they'd be happy to go through, do a coaching cycle as part of the whole coaching cycle process, really, and to really support you, whether it's to come watch you teach something and give you feedback, or like you said, being able to co-teach or model. And then if you're like, I don't want to do it with my coach, can I do it with other teachers? This is something you could totally do as a PLC or, teacher groups where even with student teachers, like have them all watch each other and maybe have, like I used to do this, it was a lesson study where we actually developed the lesson together. I did this my last year teaching in the classroom where my team, we developed the lesson together, like from start to finish, and then they watched me teach, and then we reflected on it after. And so that could be another opportunity where if I'm not comfortable to do it by myself, doing a lesson study, or whether it's with a coach or other colleagues. And most principals are willing to accommodate that because they recognize it's that public practice and learning from each other. And so this slide, so the previous slide was more the TPACK, thinking through the technology, the pedagogy, the content. And then with SAMR, once again, is developing that lesson plan and identifying the different technologies that you want to use, thinking of those original questions that I brought up originally with additional, I liked this visual, like with SAMR, what will I gain by replacing the task with a new technology? Like, is it really worth doing it this way? I don't know, I'm not saying that right, but will I gain anything? A, does the tech add new features that improves the task? Modification, does the task significantly change the use of technology? Then with redefinition, does the tech allow for creation of new tasks previously unconceivable? And when I even think about opportunities to, maybe I have it on the next slide. Yeah, so in this section of the lesson plan, because when I even think about ways that I want to personalize learning, whether it's differentiating learning opportunities, individualizing it, or truly personalizing learning, sometimes using technologies or thinking about the way a technology can be used in that SAMR model can help me come up with ideas for personalizing and making options for students. Because maybe some students, just having them do it on Google Docs versus creating a podcast, two different skill levels, but maybe that's how I can differentiate some assignments for students. Once again, I just highlight this because as you're really planning, going through your lesson plan, thinking through what do I do, and if I'm bringing in technology, what technology would I bring in? What will it do to the lesson? How will it support me? Same with what will the students do? How can this technology help me bring feedback? And that's where using things like Nearpod, where you can get some immediate feedback from the students and be able to provide it with those feedback cycles. And this section even here helps you identify the tools and materials needed. So when it comes time to implementation, you can make sure that you actually have the tools that you need. You have like the devices, you have the program, like you're ready to go. So I like the planning. And I said it before, I get that we don't realistically have time to do this from start to finish every time, but you start remembering these things and you can kind of mentor without having to actually write it down. And so with the application part, with implementation, it truly is, oh, funny, I forgot to delete that. We're gonna do this one. It's teaching the lesson, and it's really asking yourself, am I prepared to use the technology? And I would maybe have some plans, like what do I do if there are technology issues? I've even been in a conference. I remember it was a USEC conference 2 or 3 years ago. I was doing a CS First session. And my plan was to have my participants actually get onto CS First with the class that I made and have them actually do it. And like literally no one could get online. And I was like, oh, technology conference where no one can get online. This is amazing. And so I'm an ed tech, I'm very comfortable with technology, but I had to quickly pivot and had to quickly do some adjusting. And that's bound to happen. I don't ever want people to go in assuming there's going to be issues, but just recognizing if it happens, it happens. And most people are very understanding, and just there can always be a quick plan B, but just maybe if you think about it prior, you're ready for that in case it happens. Or even knowing who's in my building at that time if I need to have some assistance. Or if this is, like you were saying, if this is the first time you're doing it, get your coach to come and help you, or someone to come support you, especially if you're nervous the first time using certain technologies. And it's okay to make adjustments. I say that because that lesson study idea that I shared, it was funny because there was no technology in that lesson study that we did, but it was a math lesson, and literally maybe 15 minutes into the lesson, I recognized that my kids weren't getting it. It was hard. The task we had, it just wasn't working. And rather than torturing all of us and just powering through this lesson I created, or my team created, on the fly, I had to start making some adjustments and accommodations. Otherwise, it would have been a massive failure. And we talked about that as a team after, and like, what else could have been done? What was good about the changes that I did make? But we all recognized that it was good that adjustments were made, because it was just not working the way we had planned out. So, and that is, I mean, it's hard to even know that that's okay, but I'm telling you, it's okay. So this was actually supposed to be the, let me make sure, yeah. So the reflective piece, it's supposed to be application reflection, but part of our lesson plan does have these sections, the lesson closure and reflection, which I think a lot of us skip because you're just like, oh, I made my lesson, I'm just going to move on. But I think it's good after you teach a lesson to really go back and think about what went well, what didn't go well. Did my students really, were the targets met, those learning intention success criteria? Was the technology really effective? If so, like, what can I do to continue building on that? How can I do more of this? Or if it wasn't working so well, what adjustments can I make? What questions do I still have? What learning do I still have to do? And once again, bringing in that TPACK and SAMR. And like I said, it's just really to help guide those questions and guide that thinking and guide that reflection. And so, and that's why with this slide, I just have these pictures again, because when bringing technology into a lesson, yes, like I said, content, pedagogy, and then our best practices for digital teaching and learning, which we've, as I said at the beginning, we tried really hard to make sure aligned with the instructional priorities, those best practices, and then using the TPACK and SAMR to really think about that technology use. And I said, it's okay to be in that green section where maybe you decide a specific activity, we're not going to use technology, we're just going to use pencil, or we're just going to use whiteboards. Totally okay. And that's, I think sometimes teachers feel pressure to always have to use technology. And I'm here to say it's okay that you don't always use it. But that's where these models and this framework can definitely help guide those conversations. What other questions do you have? I just recognized I went over time a tiny bit.
No, you're fine. So I feel like I have a lot of reflecting to do. Just again, keeping in mind these teachers that I am mentoring and supporting. So I'm thinking of, because I don't want to like push technology at them before they're ready for it. And you remember what it's like being a brand new teacher. Like that's like do know what best teaching practices are and how to do them. Do you know, if you're new to a grade level, it's like, do you even know the content that you're teaching? But so I'm thinking next year we have an intern in second grade, and second grade has started using the ECRI program in their foundations block. I don't know if you're familiar with ECRI.
I know what it is. I don't know enough about it to be able to teach anyone.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. As long as, if you're just familiar with it, that's cool. But so like the second grade team this year, once they got the hang of it, like they started using their teacher iPads to teach it instead of like putting the book under the document camera, because they didn't like being tied to the document camera. And it's really great. Like they've collaborated really well. They each take turns putting together a lesson in, I think they're doing it in Google Slides. And then the rest of the team, they access it through the Lane EDU app.
Okay.
And they teach their ECRI lesson through that. And then they're able to walk around the room with their iPad and, do the ECRI lesson. So I know they want to do that again next year. I'm just thinking about like my intern. Do you think, should I like hold off on having her use those slides in her iPad, or would that be okay to just jump right in? And
I think it's okay, but I do think it's based on her skill level. Because like I said, it's that with technology, it's that new layer of knowledge and expertise. So if there's elements that if she can handle it, I think go for it. But when she does that, if her classroom management is just falling apart, or you're recognizing that she needs to work more, there's other instructional strategies, that pedagogy needs a little bit more fine tuning, and that technology is what's hindering that. That's when you might say, okay, maybe you don't try the iPads right now. Let's just keep you with the document camera so that you can practice this instead. Because that, like I said, it would depend on her skill level. And even with the example you just showed, I was thinking about an augmentation example. So when you're saying they have ECRI and they used to put it under the document camera, the direct substitution is when it's now being accessible on an iPad. So that would be an example of substitution. An augmentation would be, and I don't know if this is possible, so I don't know enough about ECRI. If the students are now accessing ECRI on their iPad, if there's links that they can click on to maybe get an example, or they click on a link to get like a video to get a better explanation, that could be an example of augmentation because it's adding some functional improvement. Like it's allowing kids, rather than just reading on the screen, if there's links that they can click on, it provides a little bit more information that you wouldn't normally get with like a book or putting it under the document camera. Okay. Does that help give an example where I have better examples too, but I was just thinking that where that direct substitution is going from the document camera, even using it under the document camera is an example of substitution, because rather than using the book. But in augmentation, you have the iPad, which is a slight augmentation, but I would still kind of say it's under substitution. But then if there's those little elements that you wouldn't normally get by clicking on some links or whatever, that's where I could see augmentation coming into play. But I will find some more examples and send them to you. And then for anyone watching this later, I think I'll even link some of those examples in the Canyons U so they can have access to that as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Also, just one last thing. Where can I find the Canyons District lesson plan template in the curriculum map? Do you remember?
It should be under the lesson planning section. I'll even email you. I actually have a template of this that I use in PDs that I've offered. I can send you that direct link as well. I believe it's supposed to be linked in the manuals under the lesson, I think it's the lesson planning section.
Okay, I'll look. But yeah, if you could send that and the augmentation examples or whatever, that'd be great.
Yep. And really with SAMR, what's funny, because I joke, because there's activity where, and I don't think I explained it very well the first time, where we had 4 situations around the room, and they were all supposed to represent one of these stages in the SAMR model. And in groups, we'd go around and read it, and then as a group talk about what it is, and then identify which one we thought it is. And it was funny because I was with ed tech leaders around the state, and it became a very heated discussion where I'm like, this got ugly really fast, because based on people's rationale, and it came down to the learning intention success criteria, they were able to justify, like some groups would say, oh no, this is augmentation, or another group would say, no, it's redefinition and here's why. And ultimately it came down to the purpose, like how was that tool being used, and what was that success, like the learning intention success criteria. Those elements really adjusted how things fell within the SAMR model. So that's why I think I also struggle saying, oh, here's a great example of augmentation, because I could give one, but then someone else could say, well, what if this is your ultimate goal? Wouldn't that be redefinition? And I'm like, well, technically you might be right. So
I remember doing that at the Tech Summit this summer, and I remember it was hard.
It was hard.
And argue certain situations.
Yes. And it's such, some people in my group were kind of mean, and I was like, okay, you say whatever it is. But they just felt strongly about, why they felt that way. And so it's just interesting. But that's why I think I start with teacher clarity, where when you identify those learning intention success criteria, it really makes a difference on what you're doing and what you're doing with that technology in your lesson. So, but I will still find the examples that I have, and I'll send it to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Camille.
You're welcome. And do you still have this information, or do you need it? The licensure, because I did update it, so I do have.
No, I've got that open in another tab. So
Okay, perfect. If you'll go ahead and fill that out, I'll make sure you get the relicensure points for attending this today. So
great, thank you.
Well, thanks for showing up. It's nice to have somebody here so I can chat back and forth. Awesome. Okay, well, have a good day.
Thanks, see ya.
Bye.